June 4 to 7, 1942, Central Pacific Task Forces, 16 and 17, under Admirals Raymond A. Spruance and Frank Jack Fletcher, positioned northeast of Midway Island. Corps metric dive bombers struck at 600 miles range from carriers. The United States Navy, battered but unbowed after Pearl Harbor faced a Japanese armada intent on seizing Midway and luring American carriers into a trap. Codebreakers at Station Hypo in Hawaii, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, had pierced Japanese naval communications, identifying Operation AF as Midway. This intelligence allowed Admiral Chester W. Nimitz to deploy his outnumbered carriers, Enterprise Hornet, and the patched Yorktown before the enemy arrived. The Japanese Kido Butai, with 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, steamed confidently, unaware their plans were compromised. American scout planes flying at 20,000 feet searched vast ocean expanses for the enemy's position. On June 4, the trap sprang shut. U.S. dive bombers led by Lieutenant Commanders Wade McCluskey and Maxwell Leslie found the Japanese carriers at a moment of vulnerability decks, crowded with refueling aircraft. Engine overhaul required after 50 hours at full throttle. The constraint was timing American pilots had to strike before Japanese planes could launch. The United States had turned Japan's surprise attack doctrine against them, using signals intelligence to dictate the battle's opening move. Japanese commanders, expecting to catch Midway's defenses unprepared, instead faced a coordinated American assault from above. Adversary point of view. Japanese lookouts cursed as American dive bombers appeared from clouds. The dive bombers' precision was devastating. SBD Dauntless aircraft plunging at 70 degrees delivered bombs that ignited fuel lines and ordnance on Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. Within minutes, 3 carriers burned uncontrollably, their flight decks transformed into infernos. Hiryu, briefly spared, launched a counterstrike that damaged Yorktown, but American persistence located and crippled Hiryu by day's end. The Japanese lost 4 carriers, over 3,000 personnel, and hundreds of irreplaceable aircrew. The United States mourned Yorktown destroyer Haman and 307 lives, but the asymmetry was stark. Japan's industrial base could not match American repair and production capacity. The number that matters is 600 miles. Carriers projected power across that range, shifting the battle's geometry. Nimitz's gamble, informed by code breaking and executed by pilots navigating vast distances, had shattered Japan's offensive core. The Pacific War's momentum teetered as American carriers, though bloodied, remained operational. This victory was not just tactical. It disrupted Axis hopes that the United States would be pinned in a defensive Pacific struggle, unable to project power elsewhere. The stage was set for a broader strategic shift as Japan's carrier losses rippled beyond the Central Pacific. The destruction of Japan's carrier force at Midway, spanning June 4 to 7, 1942, sent shockwaves through Axis strategic calculations. Corps metric American carriers maintained 600 miles, operational range dictating engagement terms. Japan's Kido Butai, once the terror of Pearl Harbor, lay in ruins, its 4 first-line carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, sunk along with their veteran aircrews. This loss crippled Tokyo's ability to project naval power across the Pacific. Japan's industrial output, strained by wartime demands, could not replace these assets at the pace of American shipyards already launching Essex-class carriers. Pilot training pipelines in the United States, ramping up in 1942, outstripped Japan's dwindling reserves, ensuring a growing disparity in skilled aviators. Japanese commanders reeling from Midway faced a grim reality. Their plan to neutralize American carriers and threaten Hawaii had collapsed. Carrier aircraft required maintenance after 100 hours of flight. The United States, by contrast, leveraged its surviving carriers, Enterprise and Hornet, to maintain offensive potential, while Yorktown's loss was offset by industrial momentum. Adversary point of view. Japanese admirals realized Hawaii was beyond their grasp. Germany, watching from Berlin, saw its own strategic calculus shift. Nazi leaders had hoped Japan's Pacific offensive would force the United States to divert shipbuilding escorts and air power from the Atlantic. Midway's outcome erased that possibility. The United States, under Admiral Nimitz's steady command, had proven it could eliminate a major naval threat in a single engagement without sacrificing its Europe-first strategy. American industry, unhindered by Pacific emergencies, continued producing destroyers, escort carriers, and aircraft for Atlantic convoys and North African operations. The myth of Axis synchronized pressure Japan in the Pacific, Germany in the Atlantic, crumbled as Japan's carrier arm ceased to be a credible threat. The number that matters is 600 miles. American carriers operating at that range ensured Japan could not dictate Pacific tempo. This allowed Washington to sustain Atlantic commitments, including preparations for Operation Torch in November 1942. Japan, now on the defensive, scrambled to rebuild its carrier force, but the loss of experienced pilots and maintenance crews created a gap that widened with each month. The United States, meanwhile, prepared to seize the initiative, eyeing offensive moves in the Pacific while reinforcing Europe. Midway had not just broken Japan's navy, it had fractured Axis hopes of dividing American power. By August 1942, the United States Navy, emboldened by Midway's triumph, launched the Guadalcanal campaign, shifting to the offensive in the Pacific. Core metric American carriers sustained 600 miles operational range, enabling rapid redeployment. The destruction of Japan's 4 fleet carriers, Akagi Kaga Soryu Hiryu, on June 4–7 had eliminated Tokyo's ability to threaten Hawaii or the West Coast. This allowed Admiral Chester W. Nimitz to redirect resources toward aggressive operations, beginning with the Solomon Islands. Japan, stripped of its carrier striking power, could not dictate the pace of Pacific engagements. American shipyards, unburdened by a prolonged defensive war, accelerated production of Essex-class and Independence-class carriers, while training programs churned out pilots at a rate Japan could not match. Fuel reserves lasted 3,000 miles at cruising speed. The United States, with Enterprise and Hornet still operational, maintained a carrier presence that Japan's depleted aircrews could not challenge. Adversary point of view. Japanese planners cursed their inability to replace lost carriers. For Nazi Germany, Midway's strategic fallout was a quiet disaster. Berlin had counted on Japan pinning American naval power in the Pacific, delaying U.S. contributions to Atlantic convoys and European theaters. Instead, the United States, free from a credible Japanese naval threat, expanded Atlantic escort forces and prepared for North African landings in November 1942. The Europe-first strategy agreed with Britain remained intact as American industry delivered ships, aircraft, and troops to both oceans. The number that matters is 600 miles. Carriers projected decisive force across that range, securing Pacific gains while supporting Atlantic priorities. Japan, forced into a reactive posture, struggled to defend its Pacific perimeter while the United States dictated operational tempo. Guadalcanal marked the beginning of a relentless American advance, made possible by Midway's disruption of Japanese naval power. Germany's U-boat offensive, though still dangerous, faced growing American escorts unhindered by Pacific diversions. Midway's legacy was clear. The United States could fight and build on 2 fronts, breaking Axis assumptions of a divided enemy. Through 1943 and 1944, American naval and amphibious forces expanded while Germany's hopes of splitting U.S. resources faded into irrelevance. The United States Navy, riding the momentum of Midway's victory in June 1942, began reshaping the Pacific theater through sheer industrial might. Core metric American carriers projected power across 600 miles, enabling sustained operations. The destruction of Japan's 4 fleet carriers, Akagi Kaga Soryu Hiryu, had gutted the Kido Butai's ability to challenge American naval dominance. Japan's shipyards, constrained by limited steel and labor, struggled to replace these losses, while the United States launched Essex-class carriers at a rate of 1 every few months. By late 1942, American production lines were delivering not only carriers but also destroyers, submarines, and aircraft in numbers Japan could not match. Naval aviators, trained in expanding programs across California and Florida, graduated at a rate exceeding 1,000 per year, while Japan's pilot pipeline, depleted by Midway's losses, produced fewer than half that number. The constraint was Japan's industrial capacity. Ship construction required 18 months under optimal conditions. American factories, by contrast, operated on schedules measured in weeks, with standardized parts and assembly lines, cutting production times dramatically. Adversary point of view. Japanese engineers cursed dwindling steel supplies for carrier hulls. On the decks of Enterprise and Hornet, maintenance crews worked relentlessly to keep aircraft operational, achieving sortie rates of 2 missions per day per plane. Fuel tanks filled to 3,000 miles capacity at cruising speed allowed carriers to roam the Pacific without constant resupply. This logistical edge, coupled with the 600-mile strike range, meant American task forces could hit Japanese garrisons from unexpected vectors, as seen in early raids on the Solomon Islands. Japan's surviving carriers, including the smaller Shokaku and Zuikaku, lacked the aircrew experience to match American coordination. The United States Navy, under Admiral Nimitz's strategic oversight, exploited this gap, deploying scout planes at 20,000 feet to locate enemy convoys. The number that matters is 600 miles. Carriers extended their reach across that distance, dictating the geometry of Pacific engagements. Japan's admirals, once confident in their ability to outmaneuver American forces, now faced a relentless opponent capable of repairing, rearming, and redeploying faster than Tokyo could respond. The industrial disparity extended beyond carriers. American shipyards in Norfolk and San Diego churned out destroyer escorts, each mounting guns capable of engaging targets at 10 miles range. These escorts protected convoys bound for Guadalcanal, ensuring supplies reached Marines fighting in the jungles. Japan's escort fleet, stretched thin across vast Pacific holdings, could not match this output, leaving their supply lines vulnerable to American submarines. Submarine torpedoes refined after early 1942, failures achieved hit rates of 1 in 3 by late 1942, sinking Japanese merchant ships at a rate of 50,000 tons per month. Japan's economy, dependent on imported oil and raw materials, began to choke under this pressure. American industrial planners, coordinating through Washington, allocated resources to both Pacific and Atlantic theaters, ensuring that Midway's strategic opening did not disrupt Europe-first commitments. Engine overhaul required after 50 hours at full throttle. This technical rhythm, embedded in maintenance schedules, kept American carriers operational, while Japan's remaining ships faced delays in dry docks. For Nazi Germany, the implications were dire. Berlin had anticipated a United States bogged down in the Pacific, diverting destroyers and aircraft from Atlantic convoys. Instead, American shipyards supplied both fronts with escort carriers joining Atlantic patrols by early 1943. These smaller carriers, launching aircraft at 15,000 feet, disrupted German U-boat operations, reducing submarine kills from 1 merchant ship per day in 1941 to 1 per week by mid-1943. The United States, unhindered by Japan's diminished carrier threat, maintained its Atlantic buildup, supporting North African landings in November 1942. Japan's inability to recover from Midway meant Tokyo could not threaten Hawaii or force American redeployments, leaving Germany to face a fully committed American industrial machine. The Pacific War, once a potential quagmire, became a theater of American ascendancy, as shipyards and training bases transformed Midway's tactical victory into a strategic turning point. By August 1942, the United States Navy, fortified by Midway's disruption of Japanese carrier power, launched the Guadalcanal campaign, seizing the Pacific Initiative. Core metric American carriers sustained 600 miles operational range, enabling rapid strikes. The loss of Japan's 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, had shattered Tokyo's ability to project force, leaving their Pacific garrisons exposed. Guadalcanal, a jungle-covered island in the Solomons, became the testing ground for American offensive strategy. Marines, supported by Enterprise and Hornet, landed under cover of dive bombers, striking at 600 miles from carrier decks. Japanese defenders, reliant on overextended supply lines, faced relentless American air raids with SBD, dauntless aircraft delivering bombs at 70-degree angles. Fuel reserves lasted 3,000 miles at cruising speed. This logistical endurance allowed American carriers to maintain pressure, rotating between strikes and resupply, without leaving the theater. Adversary point of view. Japanese garrisons cursed American bombers, appearing without warning. The Guadalcanal campaign exposed Japan's strategic overreach. Without their first-line carriers, Japanese admirals relied on land-based aircraft, which lacked the range and coordination of carrier-based squadrons. American pilots, trained to navigate vast ocean distances, maintained sortie rates of 2 per day, overwhelming Japanese airfields. The number that matters is 600 miles. Carriers projected decisive force across that range, isolating Japanese outposts. On the ground, Marines faced brutal conditions with Japanese counterattacks testing their resolve. Yet American destroyers mounting guns with 10-mile range provided shore bombardment, breaking enemy assaults. Japan's navy, desperate to reinforce Guadalcanal, sent convoys that American submarines targeted with torpedoes sinking freighters at a rate of 1 per day by October 1942. This attrition bled Japan's merchant fleet, reducing oil deliveries to critical levels. The campaign's intensity strained both sides, but American industrial depth proved decisive. Shipyards delivered replacement aircraft at a rate of 100 per month, while Japan struggled to produce 50. Maintenance crews on Enterprise working under floodlights achieved engine turnarounds in 12 hours compared to Japan's 24. Aircraft required calibration after 100 hours of flight. This cold efficiency kept American air groups operational while Japanese squadrons dwindled. The United States, leveraging Midway's strategic opening, sustained offensives without diverting Atlantic resources. Convoys to Britain, escorted by destroyers with radar effective at 15 miles, continued uninterrupted, supporting preparations for North African operations. Germany's U-boat offensive, once a mortal threat, faced growing American countermeasures as escort carriers launched patrols that detected submarines at 20 miles range. Guadalcanal's success signaled a broader shift. Japan, forced into a defensive crouch, could not reclaim the initiative as American carriers roamed the Pacific, striking at will. The Solomon Islands campaign, extending into 1943, drained Japanese resources, while American forces grew stronger. New Essex-class carriers, each carrying 90 aircraft, joined the fleet, projecting power across 600 miles with unmatched flexibility. Japan's remaining carriers, hampered by inexperienced pilots, achieved sortie rates half that of their American counterparts. The Pacific War's tempo, once dictated by Tokyo, now answered to Washington. For Germany, the failure of Japan's carrier arm meant no relief in the Atlantic, as American industry supplied both theaters without strain. Midway's legacy lived in every new carrier, launched every pilot trained, and every convoy that sailed unmolested, binding the Axis powers to a losing trajectory. The Pacific theater, transformed by Midway's outcome in June 1942, exposed the fragility of Axis coordination. By late 1942. Core metric American carriers maintained 600 miles strike range, securing Pacific dominance. Japan's loss of 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, had dismantled the Kido Butai's ability to threaten American territories or supply lines. This allowed the United States to sustain offensives from Guadalcanal to the Central Pacific without fear of carrier-based counterstrikes. Japan's industrial base, producing carriers at a rate of 1 per 18 months, could not replace losses, while American shipyards launched Essex-class carriers every 3 months. Pilot training, critical to carrier operations, saw American programs graduate 1,000 aviators annually, compared to Japan's 300. Engine maintenance required after 50 hours at full throttle. This relentless pace ensured American carriers remained operational, while Japan's air groups withered. Adversary point of view. Japanese admirals cursed their inability to match American shipyards. Germany, observing Japan's collapse, faced a strategic reckoning. Berlin had relied on Tokyo to pin American naval power in the Pacific, delaying U.S. contributions to Europe. Midway's outcome shattered that hope. The United States, unburdened by a credible Japanese threat, expanded Atlantic convoys, deploying escort carriers with aircraft effective at 15,000 feet. These patrols reduced U-boat sinkings to 1 merchant ship per week by early 1943, compared to 1 per day in 1941. American industry, operating at full capacity, supplied destroyers with radar ranges of 15 miles, ensuring convoys reached Britain and North Africa. The number that matters is 600 miles. American carriers projecting force across that distance freed resources for Atlantic priorities. Operation Torch, launched in November 1942, saw American amphibious forces land in Morocco, supported by naval gunfire accurate at 10 miles. Japan's defensive posture worsened as American offensives intensified. In the Central Pacific, carriers struck Japanese garrisons at 600 miles, isolating outposts like Tarawa. Submarines armed with torpedoes achieving 1 in 3 hit rates sank Japanese freighters at 60,000 tons per month, strangling Tokyo's oil supply. Japan's economy, dependent on imports, faced shortages that grounded aircraft and idled ships. American logistics, by contrast, sustained operations across vast distances with fuel reserves lasting 3,000 miles at cruising speed. This endurance allowed task forces to remain on station, hammering Japanese defenses without pause. The United States, leveraging Midway's strategic shift, dictated the Pacific War's rhythm, while Japan scrambled to hold shrinking territory. For Nazi Germany, the broader implications were catastrophic. The myth of Axis, synchronized pressure Japan in the Pacific, Germany in the Atlantic, had collapsed. American resources, undivided by Pacific emergencies, flowed to Europe, supporting landings in Sicily by mid-1943. Germany's U-boat campaign, once a strategic cornerstone, faltered against American escorts and air patrols. The United States, with carriers dominating the Pacific and shipyards supplying both oceans, had broken the Axis vision of a divided enemy. Japan's carrier losses, unrecoverable in time or scale, ensured Tokyo could not distract Washington, leaving Germany to face an industrial juggernaut alone. Midway's shadow stretched across both theaters as American power grew unchecked. By mid-1943, the United States, galvanized by Midway's triumph, had transformed the global war's trajectory, dictating terms in both Pacific and Atlantic theaters. Core metric American carriers projected force across 600 miles, anchoring multi-theater dominance. Japan's carrier arm, gutted by the loss of Akagi, Kaga Soryu and Hiryu in June 1942, could not recover its former strength. American offensives from Guadalcanal to the Gilbert Islands exploited this weakness, with carriers striking Japanese garrisons at 600 miles range. Essex-class carriers, each carrying 90 aircraft, joined the fleet at a rate of 1 every 3 months, while Japan's shipyards, hampered by material shortages, produced 1 carrier every 18 months. American pilot training programs, graduating 1,000 aviators annually, overwhelmed Japan's output of 300, ensuring air superiority. Fuel reserves lasted 3,000 miles at cruising speed. This logistical backbone sustained prolonged campaigns, allowing carriers to roam without constant resupply. Adversary point of view. Japanese commanders cursed American carriers, striking untouchable bases. The Central Pacific Campaign, launched in late 1943, showcased American naval power. Carriers, operating at 600 miles, pounded Tarawa and Makin, softening defenses for amphibious landings. Dive bombers, plunging at 70 degrees, delivered bombs with pinpoint accuracy, while destroyers provided gunfire support at 10 miles range. Japan's garrisons, isolated by American submarines, sinking 60,000 tons of shipping monthly, collapsed under sustained pressure. The number that matters is 600 miles. Carriers extended their reach across that distance, dismantling Japan's Pacific perimeter. American industry, unhindered by Midway's resolution of the carrier threat, supplied both theaters. Atlantic convoys, escorted by destroyers with radar effective at 15 miles, delivered troops and supplies for Sicilian landings in July 1943. Escort carriers launching aircraft at 15,000 feet reduced U-boat sinkings to 1 merchant ship per month by late 1943. Germany's strategic position deteriorated as American power consolidated. Berlin's hope of a Pacific quagmire diverting U.S. resources had vanished with Japan's carrier losses. Operation Overlord, planned for 1944, drew on American industrial output, with shipyards delivering landing craft at 100 per month. Germany's U-boat fleet, once sinking 1 ship daily, faced air patrols detecting submarines at 20 miles range. The United States, free from Pacific constraints, supported Soviet offensives, with Lend-Lease supplies shipped via Arctic convoys, escorted by American destroyers. Japan, relegated to defensive operations, could not threaten American supply lines, as submarines and carriers maintained relentless pressure. Engine maintenance required after 50 hours at full throttle. This technical discipline ensured American fleets operated without pause, while Japan's ships languished in repair yards. The global war, once balanced on axis, hopes of synchronized pressure now tilted decisively. American carriers dominating the Pacific enabled amphibious campaigns that captured key islands, while Atlantic escorts secured supply lines for European invasions. Japan's economy, starved of oil and steel, could not sustain its war effort, while American factories supplied both fronts without strain. Germany, facing a fully mobilized United States, saw its strategic options narrow. Midway's legacy, Japan's broken carrier arm, America's unchallenged industrial might, ensured the Axis could not divide their enemy. Through 1944, American forces advanced from Normandy to the Marianas, binding the Axis to defeat, with every carrier launched, every pilot trained, and every convoy delivered.